everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome on a nice, brisk Thursday morning to our third in our lecture series in our partnership with Hampton Plantation State Historic Site. My name is Bob Willey, and I have the privilege to serve as president of the Friends of the Georgetown Library. And just really excited about this series as we've continued. We've already had Hannah Marley come and give us an overview of Hampton Plantation. And last month we had the scary stories of Elizabeth Huntsinger Wolfe telling us about some of the ghost stories of Hampton and the South Santee area. And this day, we're on our third of our lecture series. We'll talk a little bit more about what follows after this in our partnership. We're pleased to have with us Christopher Reid. Christopher was born in Clearwater, Florida, but he was a Navy kid, which means he was all over the world.
Thank you.
With the longest period of time in Roanoke, Virginia. He now resides in Charleston, where he's lived for the last 7 years. His degree is a master's degree in recreation, parks, and tourism from the University of Florida. Previously worked with the National Park Service at Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie National Historic Park, as well as on the Blue Ridge Parkway at Mabry. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That's right.
Mabry Mill. And now, for almost a year and a half, he has served as assistant ranger at the Hampton Plantation State Historic Site. He'll be speaking today on Archibald Rutledge, his life and legacy. Join me in welcoming Christopher Reid.
I always warn my tour groups that I'm an extrovert, and I say I'm going to keep looking at my watch while I talk. It's not because I want this tour to be over as quickly as possible, it's because I will keep talking and talking. So I'm going to look at my watch too today and make sure that I don't do the same thing to you all. So before I talk, I always get a brief introduction, so I want to tell you a little bit about me as well. I have my beautiful wife there. That's me and her doing park rangery stuff off the clock. It's my now 4-year-old daughter Caroline and our dog Saber. Hopefully he will be just as protective when she starts getting interested in dating. And then, like you said, I went to the University of Florida and I'm a park ranger, and so I think that picture right there pretty much defines me. And then that's all I'm going to say about me. So we're going to talk about Archibald Rutledge, his life and legacy. I want to say up front, you're not school children. I know this is sort of a teacher-listener type setup, but if you have questions, I'm more than willing to answer them or to tell you I don't know and then to find out the answer. I find more and more, the more that I speak about Archibald, especially in McClellanville and Georgetown, there are so many people that have met him and grew up visiting Hampton when it was a lived-in house, not a historic site. And so I keep learning more than I ever thought I could. So we'll talk a little bit about him. Just real quick, is there anyone here that met Archibald or remembers? I know I talked to someone who remembers visiting the house. That's awesome. So I'll have to get a whole bunch of stories from you later. So before I talk about Archibald's legacy, and I know you've heard a little bit of some of this already from Hannah and Elizabeth, but I think just the whole family legacy is really important. I know this is a very busy slide, so I'll sort of walk you through it and explain it a little bit, but the whole family tree is just really impressive. And you all probably know these planter families all intermarry, and so you see all of their names all over the place. They all have a street and a house named after them. And so going way back, Archibald's third great-grandmother was Eliza Lucas Pinckney. So we know she's the one that figures out how to grow indigo as a cash crop with some help. She actually shares that information. So she's this innovator, she figures this thing out, it's going to make her a ton of money, and she doesn't keep all of the knowledge to herself. She actually advertises information about indigo. Because she was a woman, she was not allowed to take out newspaper ads. So she explained to her husband all about indigo and told him what to write in the ad and how to have people contact her, and then he went and took out the ad. We'll talk about a little bit about Peter Horry. So hopefully you all know Myrtle Beach is in Horry County. Probably the second most asked question I have as a park ranger at Hampton is how do we pronounce that word? And so I teach people it was Horry, now it's Horry, and I get them on the right track. So Peter Horry is his first cousin 4 times removed. I had to Google family trees and how to write out these people because all I know is he's his great-great-great-grandfather's brother's son. and I had to figure that out through Google. So he's a colonel during the Revolutionary War. He serves under Francis Marion, and then, of course, Horry County is named in his honor. His great-great-grandfather was John Rutledge, so he's the president of South Carolina, back when we had a president of our state. He was the 31st governor of South Carolina, but his sort of claim to fame is that he's the first governor outside of British control. He's the second Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Another claim to fame is that he has the shortest tenure as a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Basically, he was nominated by one president on their way out, and then when the next president came in, they said, nope, no thank you, and nominated someone else. So you can see he only served for a few months there. And of course, he signs the Constitution for South Carolina. His great-great-granduncle is Edward Rutledge, also signs the Declaration of Independence as the youngest signer, also governor of South Carolina. And then his great-great-grand-uncle, Charles Cotesworth Pinckney, has a National Park Service site in Mount Pleasant, also signs the Constitution. So imagine knowing your family tree and having it go so far back, and I feel like that'd be a lot of pressure, you know? I'm like, I'm a park ranger, you know, and then you've got all of these people in your family tree, so quite a family legacy. So to move it a little closer to Archibald, we've got Colonel Henry Middleton Rutledge, that's his father, and then his mother, Margaret Hamilton Seabrook Rutledge. That was the only picture I could find of her. That seems like something out of a ghost story, doesn't it? But that's the only one that I could find. When I found it and I put it on the big screen and I went, ah! And Hannah came out of her office and was like, what's the matter? And I was like, look at this picture. So, sorry if I startle you all, but that's the best I've got.
Maybe after they took it, Margaret said, no more pictures.
Yeah, she said, I'm done. So, Colonel Henry Middleton Rutledge, one of his claims to fame is that he's the youngest colonel who fights for the Confederacy in the U.S. Civil War. And then Margaret Hamilton Seabrook Rutledge, you notice Seabrook in her name, Seabrook Island, she's part of that family. So they get married in 1873. Look at this, I typed up my notes and I haven't looked at them, so I'm going to make sure I'm on the right track. Look at that, I am so far. Alright, told you I get nervous public speaking. So check out this picture of Archibald, 1887. He's about 4 years old, so that means he was born in 1883. And I took this picture out of a book. I believe that one was, we called him Flintlock, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But the caption said, just imagine Archibald's poor mother trying to get 4-year-old him dressed up in that fancy uniform, take him all the way into Charleston to get his picture taken. And as the father of a 4-year-old, I can imagine it quite vividly. He has 5 siblings: Mary Pinckney, Henry Middleton III, Thomas, Harriet Horry, and Caroline Phoebe. So he grows up in a family of 6 children, which seems like a lot to me. I've got 1 and a dog, and I can barely handle that. But his father, Colonel Rutledge, and his grandfather both grew up in a family of 8 kids. So I guess 6 might have been considered downsizing for them. But just to have 5 brothers and sisters is pretty impressive. So that is an older picture of Archibald. I'll get to that in a second. I don't have a picture of him as sort of a teenager, but in 1896 he heads to Porter Academy, which you've all heard of now as Porter God or Porter Gow, depending on who you ask. So he was 13 years old when he heads there, and there's a great story that I took a quote from. So there's a story called, or a book called A Search for Life's Extras, and it's all about Archibald Rutledge. And the author interviewed the family and got a whole bunch of great stories. But Archibald did not like leaving Hampton. He loved it. You'll see that in just about everything that he writes about, he's always talking about Hampton or hunting or playing in the woods or doing something there. And so I just love this story. From page 91. It says, one Christmas holiday, while Archie was at the academy, the headmaster decided on the spur of the moment to dismiss the students a day early. Now the colonel, which is what Archibald called his father, the colonel had already made plans to meet his son in a horse and buggy the following day, and Archie had no way of notifying him otherwise. In spite of these plans, Archie could not stand the thought of giving up an extra day at Hampton. Thus he set out on foot, crossed the ferry to Mount Pleasant, and half-ran all night long the 50 miles to Hampton. At daybreak he arrived, a tired but happy young man. He was dedicated to getting to Hampton as quick as he could. So at 16 years old, 3 years later, he leaves for Union College. So that he'd be there from 1899 to 1904. And that's a picture of him that's taken while at Union College. So he's about 19 years old. Pretty good-looking young man, I think. And that's a modern picture of Union College. Now that sort of rotunda in the center has 16 sides, and its use has changed, but when Archibald was there, it would have been a library. So definitely a place that he probably would have spent a lot of time, given that he loves books, he's always reading, he's always writing. But I won't talk a lot about Union College because he'll leave from there and go to Mercersburg Academy. And so the story behind that is after he graduates from Union College, he works a couple of different jobs. I think a lot of people end up doing that, trying to figure out what they're good at, what they actually want to do. It's the same story for me. And he writes about trying to be a telephone salesman in Washington, D.C., and he says that was not his calling. He finally registers with a teacher's academy, or a teacher's agency is the word I'm looking for. And he gets hired on for a 2-week substitute position at Mercersburg Academy. As you can see from the dates up top, he spends a little bit longer than 2 weeks there. He shows up, he meets the headmaster and the headmaster's wife, falls in love with the campus, and after 2 weeks they ask him to stay on for the rest of the year, and at the end of the year they ask him to keep coming back. And so he works there 33 years. Eventually he'll earn retirement, and as soon as he retires, he moves right back to Hampton.
Excuse me, where is Mercersburg?
So that is in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
Yep. Good question.
West
I probably should have.
West of Gettysburg.
West of Gettysburg. I believe you. I'm not a geography person, so it's north, east, south, and west, and that's the best I have. So here are a couple of pictures. On the left we have Archibald as an older gentleman. So this is him still living at Hampton Plantation. He's 83 years old. The year is 1966. As soon as he leaves Mercersburg, he moves back to Hampton, and he stays there from 1937 until 1969. He moves out in 69 and sells it to us in 1971, and then passes away in 1973. One of the things that we talk about on our tour is just how historic he kept the house. So he moves in, and you've got this 4-story mansion. Hannah probably already talked to you a little bit, but it's a 4-story mansion. You have a full basement, a full first floor, a full second floor, and a full attic. So it's 10,000 square feet. And I can attest to every single one because I've swept them all. So 10,000 square foot mansion. I have bad dad jokes too, so I'm sorry. So 10,000 square feet, this huge mansion. He's living in the home after retirement, but he wanted to keep it historic, and that's one reason for the way that we maintain the property today, and it hasn't been renovated and that sort of thing. So he only put 1 bathroom in the entire house, and he only put electricity in 1 room, and that was so he could power an electric stove. And that's all he did. He did not want to modernize it at all. There's another quote from him I didn't write down, so I'm going to butcher it. But basically, he reached out to an architect and sort of designer, and he was trying to bring the home back to its former glory. And he told the person, he said, "I wish I had the money to do it all at once." And the architect said, "Well, if you did have the money, you'd ruin the whole thing. So it's better to do it little by little." So he writes all about Hampton in this book, Home by the River, which is published 1941. It's a very interesting read. All of the park rangers read it first week on the job. It's a pretty easy read. He's a beautiful writer. He has very descriptive language. He always makes sure that you can picture what you're seeing and picture what he's writing about. Being that it was published 1941, it doesn't have politically correct terminology like we would use today. And some of the stuff that he talks about we might not write about today, but it's a great historic read to sort of see how his family and where he grew up influenced him as a writer, influenced him as a person as well. So it's a very interesting read.
So he lived there 4 years after he retired?
Yeah, exactly. Many years. So he retires in 1937 and then moves back same year, from 37 to 1969.
Oh.
Yes. And because it's such a popular book and it's about our site, I of course brought a large number of them at a reasonable price for you lovely people today. Seems a little counterintuitive to try and sell books at a library, but I'm going to try. Now, Archibald has a great quote that I'm stealing from Home by the River. And he says, "People have often asked me how, in the first place, I ever found it possible to leave Hampton. I never left it of my own free will. My parents felt that their exceedingly rural plantation son had urgent need of the disciplines of education and contact with civilization." So I just think that that really sums up, he did not want to go anywhere, and his parents said, "You're getting an education. You can't just hang out here and play in the woods." So. Now there's a whole other side to his life other than being a teacher and coming back to Hampton, and that is, of course, his family. And so Archibald meets Florence Hart and falls in love and marries her while at Mercersburg Academy. Now the story is that when he gets to Mercersburg Academy, yeah?
Excuse me, I think, Miss Ann, do you have a question?
Was he not Poet Laureate for a short period of time of South Carolina?
He absolutely was, yeah. And I have a funny story about that in just a little bit. But you're absolutely right. He's our first Poet Laureate, actually. Yep. So when he shows up to Mercersburg Academy for the substitute position, it's pouring rain. He knocks on the door. The headmaster isn't even there. They're having a party for the football team that just won a game. And the headmaster's wife comes down the stairs, and Archibald says she's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And then he finds out that she's married to the headmaster. And then he meets her sister, who is not married, and falls in love with Florence. So they fall in love, they get married. Now you can see that the date under her name, that's her life, so from 1874 to 1935. So unfortunately she passed away 2 years before he retired. So she did not get to live at Hampton, although they frequently visited for holidays and hunting trips and that sort of thing. And the very next year, Archibald remarries. He was a good-looking man, and so I think he was probably in high demand. Alice Lucas was his high school sweetheart, and so he was devastated over the loss of his first wife, and then he's working and he's worrying about trying to sell his literature, if you can imagine that. He's sort of struggling financially and trying to be a teacher and trying to sell, and then he reconnects with his high school sweetheart, and immediately they're like, all right, let's give this a shot. And so they end up getting married. He has 3 children with Florence. So Archibald Hamilton Jr. is their first, Henry Middleton the 4th is their second, and then Irvine Hart is their 3rd. And I could not find a picture of him. Their first son serves in World War II. He's actually a part of the Normandy landing, and then obviously survives World War II. Their middle son, Henry, so they called him Mid, probably for 2 reasons. Number one, his middle name is Middleton, and also he's the middle child, so they called him Mid. And unfortunately, he enlists to fight in World War II, and then gets in a motorcycle accident, and then passes away due to his sickness, his injury. And so he doesn't get to serve, but he had enlisted, and so at Hampton, there's a small family plot for Archibald, Florence, and then his 2 older children, Archibald and Mid, and they both have the U.S. World War II commemorative stone as well. So Irvine goes on to become a judge, and there's an interesting story that I did not include in my slide, but I'm going to tell you because I just love it so much. I found it while searching through these old news articles, newspaper articles. And there was a story that he was in court one day, not in session, but he was just at the courthouse, and an attorney walks in. Hey, come on in.
Let's get chairs in the back.
And the attorney lets him know there's someone going through a desk in the office next door. And the judge says, that's probably not good. And so the 2 of them go in and they sort of see this young man, and he runs out a side door. So they give chase. They're trying to catch this criminal. They don't know anything about him other than that he looks like a teenager. And the kid disappears, so they're searching the courthouse, and they find the 2 witness rooms, and they check both of them, and they can't find him. And then Judge Irvine remembers that there's this little tiny room that has the air conditioner thing. And so they walk and they sort of look under the door and they see 2 shoes. and they say, all right, they don't know if he's armed and dangerous, so they wait for him to leave to think it's clear. Basically just stand outside the door waiting for him to open it and sneak out. And when he opens the door, they grab him by the arms and they ask him, what are you doing? Why are you going through desk drawers? And he says, oh, I was just looking for this one office, and tries to come up with a story, and they don't believe it. So they go to take him downstairs to see the sheriff, and as soon as they get to the stairs, the way that the newspaper article was written is, the young man jumps down 8 stairs at once, rounds the corner, and jumps down the other flight of stairs. And the 2 older guys were like, oh well. Yeah, we tried. We're not chasing him. So they just sort of give up. He said, I really thought that I was going to see my name in the paper for catching a criminal for once, and instead this is what I get. So I just love that little story. And I knew I was going to tell it to you whether or not it was in the formal presentation. Now this is a picture of Archibald and his 3 sons. So this is at Christmas time. They're getting ready for something that they called the Hampton Hunt. So you can see at the bottom, or you might not be able to see because I didn't format this very well, but it's the Rutledge boys around 1940. And so there's Archibald on the left, and then his 3 sons there. And so the Hampton Hunt was a tradition that they started where every Christmas the whole family would get together and then they wanted to go hunting on Christmas Day. Archibald tells a couple of different stories about the Hampton Hunt. One of them is, he says, most families look forward to opening presents on Christmas morning, but not the Rutledges. You wake up and you go hunting Christmas Day. And so in the top right there I have a poem that he wrote called Afar in the Forest. And I am not a poet, but I'll read it to you anyway. Afar in the forest I'm longing to rove, afar in the forest I love, all dewy and fragrant at breaking of morn, to follow the hounds and the echoing horn. And then at the bottom I have a quote from We Called Him Flintlock, and that is a book that we sell at the ranger station out at Hampton. I did not bring any of those with me. And that is a book that his youngest son, Irvine, it's more of like a family scrapbook. It's a picture book. And it's just this compilation of all these old photos and stories, and it's sort of him talking about Hampton. It talks about Archibald's life and the family's life and that family legacy. And then it moves on to Archibald as the Poet Laureate, which I promise we're getting to. And then also talks about Hampton as a whole and its influence on Archibald. And so Judge Irvine has a quote that I have in the bottom right there. And it says, of King Arthur's happiest days, it is said, for one brief shining moment there was Camelot. It can likewise be said, for a period of 20 shining years there was the Hampton Hunt. I just think, I love that. There's a follow-up quote that I wrote down, and it says, as soon as all 3 sons were old enough, Flintlock, which is a nickname that Mid gave to Archibald because he loved hunting with a flintlock rifle. It says, Flintlock and the 3 of us hunted together along with our dear drivers, Gabriel and Prince's 3 sons, and also Richard and old Steve. This was the Hampton Hunt that began about 1923 and came to an end in 1943 when Mid was killed in a traffic accident and Arch and I went overseas in World War II. Although Arch and I and Flintlock continued to hunt, it was never quite the same. So this is one of probably the last pictures of them, all as a family getting ready to participate in the Hampton Hunt. Finally, we get to the Poet Laureate. So what a lot of people know and what a lot of students learn about is Archibald as our very first Poet Laureate. Now, something that was news to me is that the Poet Laureate position becomes a little political. So originally it had been a lifetime appointment. And Archibald lives to be almost 90, so they start thinking maybe we shouldn't make it a lifetime appointment. Maybe we should have a set term. And there's a couple of different places where people write. Legislators try to push legislation changing the timeline of it. And I couldn't find a good picture of it, but there's a document where I believe Senator Hollings writes this beautiful document, and he basically says, I just want it known to all of you that I am so sad that we're trying to take Poet Laureate away from Archibald, someone who wrote so beautifully about South Carolina, about our beautiful state, about his life and his childhood here. And he basically writes this long flowing not necessarily a piece of legislation, but he reads it out on the floor so that it has to be, you know, kept. And so it's an interesting story about the history of Poet Laureate itself. But I love this story here. So the short version of what you see on the screen is that Archibald had no clue that they were creating a Poet Laureate position. And so his son, Mid, ruins the surprise, just like kids sometimes do. So Archibald is teaching. It's 1934. That was a difficult year in his life. And he gets a telegram from his son, Mid, and it says, "You've been appointed Poet Laureate by the governor. Congratulations, terribly proud, I love you." And then later that day, he gets the formal letter from the governor saying, "It's been requested to inform you that in recognition of your contribution to South Carolina, we've appointed you Poet Laureate." So Archibald gets this telegram and he says, "I've been what now?" And then he gets the formal letter explaining what's happening. So I think that's such a family story. We always think of these historic figures either of having troubled lives or perfect lives. And it's nice to hear a little story that reminds you they're human, and kids always ruin surprises. And I read that and I loved it so much. Apparently, he was destined to become Poet Laureate since birth. In the book A Hunt for Life's Extras, there's a story, and it says that Archibald's mother told him of his first literary efforts when he was just 3 years old. He had run in from outdoors and recited in that, I'm not going to try and imitate a 3-year-old's voice, but you know they all sound cute. And he says, "I saw a little rattlesnake too young to make his rattles shake." So, seems like he was always a writer. So we're going to talk a little bit about Pat Conroy. It seems a perfect place in a library. Are all of you familiar with Pat Conroy? Local author.
Yes.
Heard a little bit about him once or twice. So we have a book on the right called Our Prince of Scribes, and that's a bunch of writers remembering Pat Conroy. And then the book on the left here is one that he wrote called My Reading Life, and it sort of tells his story. And so the book on the right is important because someone who has such a strong connection with Archibald, it was really important for us to include his work at Hampton. And so we actually helped host with the McClellanville Museum a book signing event for him.
What was his connection? You said he had a strong connection.
Yes, I have a great quote I'm going to read just for you. So in this book on the left, My Reading Life, it's a little bit of a long story, but I really think it's worth it. And I've still got time, so bear with me. So Pat Conroy is brought out to meet Archibald Rutledge as a young man. He's brought by his English teacher, Jean. And so this is Pat Conroy writing. "Mr. Rutledge was straight-backed, well-groomed, and as crisp as a stalk of celery. He wore leather patches at the elbows of his sport coat and demonstrated an innate courtliness that I couldn't imitate in 100 years. On our drive back through Charleston, Jean asked me how I liked Archibald Rutledge. I admitted that I was unprepared to meet such an important man and could hardly believe that he had spent so much time with me and seemed so unhurried as he answered my foolish, boyish questions. I told Jean that Archibald had told me about the definitive value of details. So then I described the path where Francis Marion had escaped the British cavalry patrol. I spoke of camellia bushes 10 feet high and the color of ink Mr. Rutledge used to write his poems, and that his ancestors had built the plantation in 1735. Well, you didn't learn the most important thing, Jean said. What are you talking about? Here's what you should have learned, but you didn't. Now you know how to treat a young boy or girl who wants to be a writer. If, by a miracle, you become a writer, Archibald Rutledge just showed you how a famous writer treats a no-account 16-year-old boy who's got the same dreams he did as a kid. He says, if I ever get to be a writer, Mr. Norris, I'll be nice to every kid I meet. That's a promise. I love that story. And it's so perfect. Just like a 16-year-old kid to think he's learned the lesson and then try to show it off a little bit by talking in great detail about everything he learned, and then the teacher's like, nope, you missed it. And he goes on to say that in later years, as he does become a successful author, he keeps up with his old English teacher, Jean, and Jean never lets him forget this encounter. He says, Jean, being his teacher, gets all these letters addressed to Pat, and forwards them to him, and then follows up and asks if he's written them back. And Pat basically says, I'm so tired of responding to letters. I actually need to write books. And Gene said, you promised. Don't forget Archibald. And so I think that every time Pat Conroy got a letter in the mail, he probably thought about Archibald Rutledge, meeting him, and then going, I've got to write this kid back. So, such a great story. So, these are a couple of pictures. We've got the one on the left is a picture of Archibald Rutledge Academy, taken from the Archibald Rutledge Academy yearbook. And then the picture on the right is the cover of the 1982 yearbook. And so I've always heard about the Archibald Rutledge Academy. It was a little hard for me to find information about it. So in McClellanville, the public school system apparently was struggling a little bit, and a lot of the people in the town weren't so happy with the education and the teachers, and it seemed like there was a lot of turnover. And so what ends up happening is they make a private school. And the goal is, with a title private school, you can sort of pick and choose who you want to hire and try and improve the education system a little bit. And when they're trying to figure out a name for the school, obviously they have to choose the most famous person from McClellanville, someone who grew up there and lived there and continued to live and visit. So it ends up getting the name Archibald Rutledge Academy. Now that school in that name doesn't exist anymore, but the name changes over so that they can get accredited by the state. They have to change it a little bit. And does anyone know what that school is now?
Creeks.
Creeks. See, you didn't know there was a pop quiz today. So, Creeks. It's abbreviated CREECS, which is short for Cape Romaine Environmental Education Charter School, which is a heck of a name, huh? So, it's the perfect school to be born out of in Archibald Rutledge Academy, and I'll tell you why. Number one, they're an environmental education school, so they're all about being outdoors. A quote from Archibald in the book Tales of Whitetails, which you can gather is a book about hunting deer. He says, "One of my greatest delights is to watch wild things, and in that way try to learn more about the way they live, so that I might know better how to live myself." I know I have a lot of quotes here, but I figure we're talking about an author. What's the best way to talk about an author is probably to use his own words and the words of people who knew him. So it's a school all about environmental education. Archibald was always trying to be outside. The school still comes out. We give them free house tours and that sort of thing. I feel like we kind of are obligated to, you know. And we partner with them for a bunch of events. So, for example, we're moving into the Christmas season now. And what they're going to do is they usually make decorations for us. And so we'll get popcorn strings, and they'll take longleaf pine cones and they'll decorate them to look like owls and turn them into Christmas tree decorations. And more than likely, I'll be bundled up outside trying to find a holly tree or a pine tree to cut down, and we'll bring it inside and we'll put them in the ballroom, and they'll come in and they'll decorate, and we'll make wreaths out under the front portico and sort of decorate this house. And it's just great to have these children who have no clue who Archibald is, and to teach them about him and to teach them about his family legacy and the legacy that he has on even their school itself. So I love that. I love having them out there. They're kids, so they're just excited to be out of school. You know, they don't realize that we're trying to teach them as well. So, and then finally we get to Hampton Plantation itself. Now I am an assistant ranger there, so I would probably say that I think that might be his most important legacy, because Hampton Plantation pays me. But also I think Hampton is a great place, and I will tell you why. I have a whole list. I wrote a whole bunch of things down because I didn't want to forget any of them. We have so much history and so much facts to remember. You know, you forget more than you ever hope to, and I find that every time I give a tour, I'm either learning something new from someone who visited Hampton so long ago, or I forget the simplest things. People ask me, you know, when did Archibald die? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know that number, and so I wrote it all down here for you. Hampton, we say, is the oldest non-restored plantation house open to the public. Now, I'm sure whoever gave it that moniker knows more than me. in my research, I found it just to be the oldest plantation house that's open to the public, whether restored or not. And if you visit Charleston, Drayton Hall says the same thing. They say they're also the oldest plantation house open to the public.
Liars.
Exactly, exactly. And I have data to back up my claims. So we all know when our land was purchased. So Hampton, we know that the Rutledge family or the Oree family got the land in 1730. And my understanding, I don't work for Drayton Hall, but my understanding is they know that that Drayton family got the land in 1738. So we have 8 years on them there. Neither of us knows exactly when our house was built and started getting lived in. So that's where the debate sort of comes in. But they recently had some wood cores taken from some attic beams, and they think that the house couldn't have been lived in any earlier than the 50s, 1750s. And so I think we've got them beat. I think we're the oldest plantation house. So it's a great house. Hopefully all of you have been on a tour, but if not, I'll tell you in a few minutes about a special event that we're going to have just for you, so you have the opportunity. But it's a beautiful house. We are conserving it. And so what that means is the way that we take care of this property is by trying to keep it as original as possible. So living in the Charleston area and historic Georgetown, you can go to any house museum any day of the week, and you'll see different methods of taking care of them. So the most common one, I think, is probably restoration. So that's where you restore a house, you make it feel brand new. So when you walk in, you sort of feel like you're walking back in time. You know, they've got all the replica furniture, and they're probably in the period outfit. They might even be talking in the accent. And the idea is that you can walk in and sort of see what it was like back then. The problem with restoration is that none of it is original. It's all new. There's another method. It's preservation. And so preservation is where you basically freeze this place in time. So it's more like a house museum. It's going to have air conditioning, so the temperature never changes. Everything's going to be behind glass or plexiglass. You're not allowed to touch it. We've all been in a house museum where there's rooms that you're not even allowed to walk in. You know, they've got the velvet rope and you can just peek in and look around the corner. Preservation is great because it stops it in time, and you've got a mix of original and modern. But what we're doing is conservation. And that means we are keeping it as original as possible. So for example, in one of the rooms, we call it the blue parlor. It has paint from the 1730s. And because we're keeping the house original, we don't have it protected behind plexiglass or anything. So when you walk in the room, all we do is say, please don't touch this, and we have to trust that you listen to us because we don't want to put anything in that's not original. It's the same with the glass windows. For all those windows that you see, those are called 9/9s because you have 9 window panes over 9 window panes, a very creative name. And what you'll see when you walk in is a bunch of the glass at elbow level has been replaced with modern glass, and a bunch of the top panes are original. So they'll have the lines in them or the bubbles in them. And basically, if you visit Hampton and you break a window, please don't, we're going to replace it with modern glass. And that's because we don't want it to be falsely authentic. We don't want you to think you're seeing something that wasn't original to the site. A lot of people really don't like that, the idea that we're putting something modern in there on purpose. But the great thing is when you walk through, you know that piece of glass is from the 1750s. That piece of glass is from Hurricane Dorian, that kind of thing. So I really love the way that we maintain this house. So the things that Archibald's legacy allows us to interpret, because without him we wouldn't have Hampton. He sold the house to the State Park Service in 1971, 2 years before he passes away. And he had a couple of stipulations in that bill of sale. One of them being that we conserve it, that we keep it as historic as possible. So that's really influenced the way that we talk about it and the way that we maintain it. Another thing is he mentions that there always has to be a job for an Alston. And so behind the mansion on the left-hand side there, you can see the kitchen house. Now Archibald's dad, the colonel, passed away in 1921. And Archibald was still working at Mercersburg, waiting to get the retirement benefits. And so he doesn't move back until 1937. So there's a 16-year period where no one lives in the mansion full-time. They just visit for Christmas and they visit for hunting and that sort of thing. There was a couple that lived in the kitchen house and took over and managed the property. And so the couple is Prince Alston and his wife Sue. Now, Archibald, Prince, and Sue were all born after the Civil War, but just shortly after it. So none of them knew the institution of slavery, but they did know of it from parents and grandparents. And Archibald and Prince were born the same year. They grew up together. They loved each other. At least the way that Archibald writes about it, they were very, very close, which is pretty interesting given where they're growing up, and there's not been a civil rights movement or anything like that. But they're best friends, they do everything together, and Prince marries Sue, and so Prince and Sue move into the kitchen house and they take over the plantation. Archibald wrote and called Sue the guardian angel of Hampton because of everything that she did for the site. She lived to be, we think, about 105. No one's exactly sure of her birth year. Some people have her as old as 114. One of my personal favorite stories, in researching Sue, I was reading some transcripts of some interviews with her, and an interviewer was asking her about her age, and I think she was tired of talking about it, as we all get, just tired of thinking about how old we are. I just turned 31 2 days ago, and I'm already sick and tired of talking about it. So, but the interviewer asks her about her age, and I can kind of see in the transcript, I picture her rolling her eyes, and she says, "All I know is I'm past 100, working on 200. Like, isn't that good enough for you? And apparently she was very witty, and everyone who talked to her could just tell that she was telling you stories, but she was telling you real events, things that had happened. So Archibald writes a lot about her, writes a lot about Prince, and has a whole bunch of stories about them. I just don't have time to tell you. One of my favorites, it's a little bit of a sad story, but one of my favorites is Archibald was visiting for a Christmas, and he says that he's got everyone packed up in the car, and everything is squished in, and it's on the roof and in the trunk, and everyone's smushed together. And just as they go to leave, Prince runs back over, and it's pouring rain, and Prince runs out in the rain and asks Archibald to get out one last time. And being how close they were, Archibald's just like, okay. I don't know if I have any friends that close. I'd be like, no, we're going. We're in here, this is it. So Archibald gets out, and it's pouring rain, and Prince says, I just want one last look at you. And Archibald thinks, this is a little strange, like, I'm going to see you, in a couple months or next Christmas. And then before they see each other again, Prince passes away of a sickness. We're not sure what it was, but he passes away. I just think that's a sweet story that they have such a strong connection, and something tells Prince that something is coming, and he just wants to see his best friend, wants to get one last long look at him. So Sue and Prince are both buried in our historic cemetery. So on your drive in and then on your drive out, you pass a cemetery that has a bunch of modern headstones, and that is a historic burial ground. That's land that was given to that enslaved community as burial ground, and it's still it's controlled by the community next door to Hampton, Germanville or Germantown, depending on who you ask. They have very strong opinions about that, and the community sort of controls that burial ground. And the only people who are being buried there now are people from the immediate area, people who are descendants of people who were enslaved in the area. And so it's real touching to see that people still have such a strong connection. Make sure I'm on track. I still have a whole list of other things. So, talking about Hampton, talking about Archibald's legacy, all of the stuff that just this house enables us to talk about. We talk about preservation, restoration, and conservation. We talk about what a plantation is and its transition through time. We'll talk about the Atlantic slave trade. We'll talk about enslaved communities. We talk about their lifestyle, their skills, their labor. We talk about the transition into freedom immediately after the Civil War and what that looks like, whether you can even really call it freedom. We talk about sharecropping and tenant farming. We talk about the Georgian and the Adamesque architecture style. And so Georgian architecture style is all about symmetry. So the left half of the house looks the same as the right half. The first floor looks the same as the second floor. We talk about the actual house construction. We talk about the mortise and tenon joints that go inside it. We talk about the enslaved workers who are building it. A better term, to use today's language, they would have been considered artisans. They're blacksmiths and carpenters and engineers and architects. We talk about that. We talk about rice and indigo, cultivation, harvesting, shipping. We talk about archaeology all the time. We'll talk about the Gullah Geechee culture. We talk about Rumford-style fireplaces. I know fireplaces is not a big tour sale. If I say, come see our fireplaces, people go, I've got better things to do. But just 2 weeks ago, in my miscellaneous research, I discovered a pretty cool story. Someone may have known about it already, but I was reading about Peter or Reid, trying to find out why he was special enough to get a county named after him. And he fights in the Revolutionary War, and it says he fights in the Battle of Wambaugh Bridge. I was like, well, we have a Wambaugh Creek right behind Hampton. Where's this bridge? And so I Google it, and I find this PDF document with information about the battle and the routes that the troops took and where they were at and who won and who lost to who. And it happens just down the road from us on the other side of Germanville. And we find out that Peter or Reid is fighting for Francis Marion and is fighting a British officer who later goes on to become a British scientist who goes by the name Count Rumford. And he's the guy who designs the Rumford-style fireplace that the family later installs in their house. It revolutionized fireplaces. That guy, Count Rumford, in today's terms, he goes viral. Everyone in the world wants a Rumford-style fireplace because he designs one that finally heats up a room and pulls the smoke out. Before him, it was the exact opposite. You lit a big fire, your heat went straight up into the atmosphere, and your smoke filtered in. And those two fought each other just down the road. And thankfully, neither of them gets shot, and they both go on to do other things. So it's just 2 weeks, and I was sitting at the computer, and I was going, as I was reading, and Hannah's in the office next door. She's like, what is wrong with you? I said, come read this. And so it's very exciting stuff. We talk about George Washington. We have a picture here from the other angle. You've got the portico and then the George Washington oak out there. We talk about his visit to Charleston. We talk about the reason that it's called the Washington Oak. And I'm not going to tell you that story because I want you to come out to Hampton and hear it. So tempt you a little bit there. So what am I doing as a park ranger to help maintain this big family legacy? We're doing archaeology digs all the time. I know I've seen some of your faces out there partnering with us. Yeah, I know you're there. And you know more about Hampton than I'll ever know probably too. We do digs just on the other side of this portico. We accidentally found a historic building. There's a power line that runs underground from the mansion to the pump house that controls the pump for all the water for the park. And the power line died, so we went to dig it up. And we asked the archaeologist if we could do that, and he said, that's fine. Someone had to dig there to put it in. So we're like, great. We don't have to be careful or delicate about it. So we go get the tractor, and we're using the backhoe, and we're scooping things up. And then we pulled up a brick wall that wasn't supposed to be there. Apparently, whoever put the power line in never told anyone about it. And so we called the archaeologists, and they came out, and we scheduled a dig, and they found a 10-foot by 10-foot foundation. And so now we've got to figure out what in the world it is. Because these people love Georgian style so much and symmetry, they brought out ground-penetrating radar to check the same spot on the other side, and they think they found some stuff over there, so that's going to be our next dig. So much in Hampton just happens accidentally, like research on Count Rumford or finding historic buildings. So we accidentally maintain his legacy. We partner with groups. So down the road in Germanville, there's the Howard AME Church. And we'll bring them out for events, and so they have a small group of ladies that'll come out and sing. Last year for our Christmas event, we were all in the formal dining room eating venison chili, and they were singing some spirituals, and it was just this real beautiful moment that was happening. We partner with groups like the Georgetown County Library. We have representatives at most events like the boat shows and that sort of thing. And obviously we're a tourist site, so we want to bring people out and we want to make money and we want to sell books. But more than that, there's a lot of history there that we have to share with people, and so that's how we get them in. We have standards-based education programs for students. So we've given, if you can believe, out at a plantation, we've given programs to 3rd graders, up through 8th graders, up to high school students. We've got archaeology digs. We have never-ending research that's happening. And so the question is, how do we do all that? Oh, I have one more picture that I didn't put in my notes. This is one thing that we did. Behind the house, there is a ledger, which is basically a long, flat stone that covers a burial spot. And this is the stone for John Henry Rutledge. You can't read what's on either of these before or after pictures because I put them in the wrong order. So I had to flip the picture around for it to make sense. And so the after picture is the nice clean one, but all the words are backwards. So, but we had a gravestone cleaning. We brought a professional in, and we used this chemical. It's called D2, and it eats all of the living stuff on there, the moss and the algae and all that growth. A lot of people use bleach to clean them, and bleach will make it a nice bright white, but it actually eats away at the stone. And so over time that would crumble. And so we're trying to maintain all of the stones and all of the things on our park. So this Saturday I will be doing an indigo dyeing demonstration. It's from 10 to 3 if I don't get rained out. Otherwise I'll be hanging out next to a fire trying to stay warm. And basically I will be using natural indigo and dyeing products. And I'll be educating people on the whole process from growing indigo through cultivating it, through turning it into a dye. We were supposed to have a sweetgrass basket class this Saturday, but unfortunately, Miss Barbara called us and told us she has the flu. And we said, stay home, don't come out. It's gonna be cold and miserable anyway, so don't do it. So we've pushed it back one Saturday, so the 23rd. That's from 11 to 3, it's $45, and you get taught how to make a sweetgrass basket, and you get to take it home with you. A lot of people really like to do that at this time of year and then give it as a Christmas present. But talking about how we maintain that legacy, we give historic programs, and we also offer events and hope that people will come out and invest in the park so that we can continue to offer programs like this. So come out and visit Hampton and help us. A few other things. That's my contact information if you want it. I'm Christopher. I'm a park ranger. That's our park phone number, and that's my park email. I work for the government, so I have nothing to hide from you, right? In theory. I don't get paid enough to have anything to hide from you, so that's how you can find me. You know where I work. You know what my family looks like, so there's no hiding from you. I'm going to rely on my notes now. In December, we're also having a special holiday program called Hampton Home for the Holidays. And so it's going to be over the first 2 weekends in December. I would know the dates, but I, for some reason, didn't leave them in here. So, first 2 weekends in December, it's going to be on a Friday and a Saturday. And the idea is it's from 12 to 2, and you come out and you get a special holiday tour of the house. So you learn about how these planter families would have decorated their houses. We get the Creek's children to come out and decorate. We'll have a choir out there for an hour in between the 2 house tours. So you can get a tour from 12 to 1, and then from 1 to 2, there'll be a choir singing, and then from 2 to 3, if you show up after the first tour, there'll be the second tour. We talk about Christmas for the enslaved community and what it looks like for them and their relationship with the planter family. So that'll be real interesting in December. Obviously, we love to have volunteers. So you can come out and we will let you play in the historic gardens and help us get those cleaned up. We'll let you, we'll help you learn how to give house tours if you want to do that. We have several docents who will just volunteer twice a month and sit in the house for a couple hours and give house tours and walk people through. Volunteering is wonderful. And then obviously the most important thing is money. And so if you want to give us your money, we would love for you to do that. We have a couple of ways of doing that. One of them is visiting and touring. Another one that I have here is through purchasing a state park passport. Many of you probably already have one or have learned about it. So the park passports are awesome. There's 3 levels. There is the green passport, which is $75. And that gets you into any park that charges admission free. So if you visit Charlestown Landing or you visit any of the beaches, it'll get you in, and everyone in your car for free. Most people think, most places usually say that's you and 3 other people, but in reality it's everyone in your vehicle. So if you show up in a 15-passenger van to the beach and you have a park passport, they're all getting in for free. So that one trip would pay for it. There is the senior version of that passport, which is half price, so it's $37.50, and it's the same deal. I would try and sell a bunch today, but Hampton has sold out of them, so we've done good at selling them so far. So the one that I have today, if you're interested, is our gold one. That's our Park Passport Plus. That's the high tier one. So it's $99, And what it does is it gets you and everyone in that giant van that you have, gets you into the park for free, but it also gets you on any regularly scheduled programs for free. So if you come out to Hampton and we're given a house tour and you've got 14 other people with you, you all get into the house tour for free instead of having to pay for it. So that's a great deal. It lasts a year. So if you bring, like I do, every time my family visits from Virginia, we go to a state park and a national park and a beach, all 3 of those, and then 3 or 4 restaurants. It ends up paying for itself. And then our most important thing, and I have a bunch of these sheets on the table in the back, I keep watching my watch, is all about the Friends of Hampton. And so this is how you partner with us specifically to help us continue to build interpretive signs, to help us hire park rangers, because positions like mine are considered temporary as long as we have friends donating. So please, for my sake, become a friend of Hampton. We use it to do things like, we recently cleared out, there's a small rice field next to the house. It's called Kitchen Field because it's next to the kitchen house. And we cleared off the rice dike, and we had a rice trunk installed, which is the actual gate system that lets you flood and drain a field. And now we can demonstrate to people what it looks like to do that work. And we can talk about the people who would have been controlling the rice trunk and that sort of thing. And so your money does go directly towards the park. It's a nonprofit organization, so that's important for your taxes, which are coming up soon, unfortunately. The minimum membership, the thing says, is $10. So $10 for a year-long membership, that's just about as cheap as Netflix, so it's pretty good. We take checks and cash and jewelry and inheritances, but that gets you the benefit of being a member of Hampton, having things done. Anytime you see something that's put in and it says through the generous donations of the Friends of Hampton, you know who that is and you get to brag a little bit. We also send out a quarterly newsletter so you know what's happening before the general public does. And we have Friends meetings where we actually reach out to people and we say, for example, you being from Georgetown, you're one of our closest neighborhoods, right? You're just 20 minutes up the road, closest communities, rather. And we love to have the people who live in the area and their input because, you know, so often working for the government, we have a bunch of people in Columbia that think that they know what's best for Hampton, and then they usually try and put something in, and the local public says, why would you do that? And so if you become a friend of Hampton, you get to help us with that. And then there's all sorts of levels there. Like I said, the lowest is $10. If you do $75 or $99, that includes the passport, so you don't have to do one thing and then pay for another thing. And then finally, the best news, can I talk about it? You're good? Okay. So we're going to take a break in December from our lecture series because we know December's crazy busy for everyone. It's a little busy for us as a park, and then for us as people, it's just wild. So we're taking a break, but in January we're going to pick it back up, and it's going to be a special event. And so I've written this down so I don't butcher the description. We're inviting all of you to come out to Hampton. It is, our admission fee is going up in January as a park. It'll be $10 a person. And we are going to charge you all $10 a person, and you can buy tickets through the Friends of the Library. But this isn't just a plain old visit to Hampton. So if you were here, you met Miss Elizabeth. We're going to have her in period outfit as Harriet Reid. We're probably going to have someone out dressed as Eliza Lucas Pinckney doing sort of a living history demonstration. We're going to have food, depending on the weather, probably hot coffee and hot tea and hot food, sandwiches. I'll be doing another indigo demonstration. So if this one gets rained out or it's too short notice and can't make it out, we'll have that going on. And that is specifically for you all. So we're not really advertising it. It's not anyone who shows up that day to the park could experience it, but we love you guys and you've been such a great audience and such a great group for us that we want to do something special for you. The $10 will go both to Hampton and to the Friends of the Library group, so that'll help continue putting on events like ours and events like yours. And that's all I have.
What's the date?
Oh, good. That's a great question.
Thursday, January 9th.
Thursday, January 9th, 10 a.m., same time. So, nice and early in the day. Yeah?
Would you describe the ballroom, the size of the ballroom, and the fireplace around?
Yes, absolutely. Beautiful. Is the short answer. The long answer, The ballroom, when I give a house tour, I save the ballroom for last because it's everyone's favorite room, and so I don't want to give away the best thing up front. And so we walk through the house and we get to the ballroom. It's this long room. I always start by talking about just the floorboards, and people never think they care about floorboards. And then I say these floorboards are made from longleaf pine, more than likely, and they're 36 feet long. So it's one piece of wood. It goes from one side all the way to the other. It's this big room. It's 2 stories tall. You've got these huge pieces of cypress paneling that are going to be hand carved and installed by those enslaved carpenters. You've got this crown molding along the top that's all, again, handmade. We call it dental work. Some people call it sawtooth, so it has that toothy look. You've got this vaulted ceiling, which means it looks like a ship's bottom turned upside down. So you look up and you see these huge 15-foot cypress panels, and then you see the crown molding, and then the ceiling curves in at the top. It's painted haint blue. That was painted around Archibald's time. Historically, we think it would have been white. That makes sense for the time period. And you've got this huge fireplace. I think it's maybe 8 feet across or something. It's massive. And I was giving a tour just a couple weeks ago to a lady who remembered visiting with her parents. Her parents were friends with Archibald. And she said the parents were doing the parent thing, sitting down, drinking coffee, talking. And she brought her dollhouse, and she set her dollhouse up in the fireplace and was playing as if the fireplace was a whole house, and she was playing with the dolls in there. It's that big, and so it's just beautiful. It used to be lined with Delft tiles, which the Park Service took out because the house settled a little bit, and we don't want any of them to just pop off and break. So we took those out, but we have a picture of them in the ballroom, and then we have a couple of them on display in the ranger station as well. And it's my favorite way to end the tour, so is that good enough? I'm not a poet, so I'm sorry.
Very impressive.
Yeah.
It's monstrous.
Christopher's, oh, another question?
Sorry.
I just want to make sure for January 10th, you don't need to get tickets. You can just show up.
You
And
can.
then I-
That's right, January 9th. You can just show up and say where you're from, but we will have tickets. We're going to leave them with the friends. I think we're going to leave them at the front desk, right?
We'll have information at the front desk. Yeah.
There you go. So you'll be able to come any other time and buy tickets.
That'll be fine. What'll help us is just getting a number for food and other expectations there. So if you can do it in advance, very helpful. All the way through the month of November and December, we'll have them at the desk here for people to be able to purchase.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, no
And
problem.
then I see.
Oh, well, where do y'all get the sawgrass, sweetgrass? Because I've heard it's become very scarce.
Yeah, so we don't actually provide it. Miss Barbara does. So she's a lady that's been making them her whole life. She won't tell us where she gets it from. I wish I knew.
But she can provide enough for everybody to...
She does, yeah. My understanding is that it's a combination of the sweetgrass itself, of the reeds from palmetto trees, and of reeds from growing in along the banks as well. So
Yeah.
it's not all just sweetgrass, but it is sort of a combination of all of them. But she won't tell me. Yeah.
If you got one of those $99 park passes, will that get you in the
I knew someone was going to ask.
January 9th event?
So, here's the deal. Yes and no. Technically, the small print on it says that the passport gets you into regularly scheduled programs. So it's not special events. But because we are partnering with you all to put the event on, if you had that, we would probably let you in for free because we like you so much. If you bought it from me today, right now. Yes?
I came in a couple minutes late. Did you say Peter Reid grew up in the plantation, or he just was there?
Right.
The Reid family was there, so.
That's right. So the O'Rees that are living in the house would be Daniel and his wife Harriet. I didn't go into a lot about Peter, so you didn't miss anything about him, other than he fights in the Revolutionary War. I don't know that Peter grew up in the house. It would make sense that he visited it because he grows up in the area, and him and Daniel, who live in the house, are cousins. So they probably knew each other and probably went back and forth, but we haven't found anything that says that he spent a considerable amount of time there.
Christopher, thank you very, very much.
My pleasure.